teaching in the Department of English for a long time. So I don't want to say the number of years, but a long time. Okay, so Victoria María Castells is a Cuban-American writer from Miami, Florida. She holds a BA in English from Duke University and an MFA in creative writing from McNeese State University in Louisiana. Her poems have appeared in such journals as Reservoir, The Journal, Quarter After 8, as well as her own Notre Dame Review. Her first collection, The Rivers Are Inside of Our Homes, recently published by the University of Notre Dame Press, was chosen by me as poetry editor of the Notre Dame Review for the final title in the Notre Dame Review Book Prize, a series that was begun by our founding editors and emeriti professors of English, John Matthias and William O'Rourke. This prize is meant to honor an author appearing in our journal who had not yet had a book published in either fiction or poetry. Previous volumes include John Choctaw's Times Beach and James D. Redwood's Love Beneath the Napalm. I first came across Victoria's work some years ago when I accepted two poems about Cuba, the homeland of her parents as well as my own, for the Notre Dame Review, Trilocation and Caja de Muerto, that also appear in this powerful collection that we are here to celebrate. I immediately saw an ideal candidate for the prize. So I requested from her a manuscript for a full-length collection. It did not take long for her to send it to me, and I eagerly gave her my feedback, hoping that it showed her my heartfelt appreciation for her poetry, which I will now share with you. Victoria writes in Migration, one of the first poems in The Rivers Are Inside Our Homes, Havana and Miami, double paradise, to have and not have at all. The last line could be turned even more existentially to be and not to be at all. Therein lies the quandary of being Cuban American, a liminal space of being where one is haunted by the exile condition beyond the possibility of resolution or even the anodyne of forgetting. Victoria confronts the agonies of exile, the relentless gravity of memory, and the deterioration of Cuba under communism with disquieting surrealism and stark emotion. Please welcome Victoria María Castells.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Victoria María Castells. Hi. So I think I was telling a couple of people earlier that a couple of months ago I had a dream where I was going to give a poetry reading and I forgot the book, and then I was trying frantically in this dream to go on my phone and try to find a PDF I had emailed myself. I tried to open Dropbox in my dream, and none of this worked in my dream. And then at the end there was no presentation, and then there was this woman who I've never met in my dream who was staring at me in just anger, and I was like, no, I have ruined my poetry reading. And so I remembered the book, so already I think this poetry reading is going much better than it did when I first dreamt of some random poetry reading, thankfully. And I'm so happy to be here with you guys. This collection I've written over a period of years. I actually started out in my MFA program doing fiction. And I remember somebody asking me, because my language in the stories tended to be very poetic, more lyrical, oh, do you write poetry? I was like, no, I do not. And then later on, I was like, actually, I think the student made sense. And then by the end of my MFA program, I took poetry workshop for the first time. I started writing poems. And I kind of just felt my home through poetry, which was really wonderful. And I'm so glad to share this with all of you. Okay, so the first poem I'm going to read today is called Necropolis. It is actually it was one of the first poems I had written in grad school. And workshop was so helpful. I remember being like, oh, they're talking about things like sonic texture. Like, I didn't know what that was. I'd only taken fiction workshop before. I thought, how beautiful that we can go in a workshop and talk about something with sonic texture. And so this poem just went off of that. It's one of my oldest ones, and it's dedicated to my grandmother. Necropolis. My love for you is of the sarcophagi of Havana, sea suppressant cases and corpses buried inside the soil that still tastes itself communist. When run down in seawater, their cells cannot wrinkle away, break back into the ocean. They are marble and immune. The seawater has not found into us. I think under your skin broke the angst of a beloved human angel, as if in the Isle of Pines, the dead under an escudo, marked as a stained white stone in its American citizen cemetery, covered under the Marabu. I think you died and never came back to where you wanted to go. Yeah, so there, it mentions the Isle of Pines. It's a place where Americans used to live and work for corporation. In Spanish, it's Isla de Pinos, and I just found it interesting, the idea of the buried dead and what happens to them. And where you die is such an important part of your life. Where you die is very important, and where you die isn't necessarily where you think it's going to be. And I just thought it was, I don't know, something that kind of took hold for me, this idea. I thought it was sort of an interesting idea of old American history in Cuba. It was just something that just stayed in my mind. Okay, and that leads to my next poem, which is called February 15th, 1898. It's on the U.S., it's about the sinking of the Maine. Okay. February 15th, 1898. My hold on Cuba is spiritualist, like the U.S. Navy on the battleship Maine, bones buried and honored in the Cementerio de Cristobal Colón, trying to learn what it means to be Cuban and dead for 1 year. Before taken back, Arlington assimilated, American bound, and forever to speak in Spanish because they learned how to be Cuban, more Cuban than me, dead in Havana for 1 year, and I living for none. But if I could ask you if you still know of the others, their cells drifting across the bay, in contrast to your bones, comrades unclaimed, disinterred, tunneled from themselves in the Caribbean Sea, to these others say, you gave us our freedom, it lasted 56 years. You have doubled that in water. If one could swim there and feel them on the skin, it would take all these years to forget it. Yeah, just in general, sometimes, for a brief period of time, started thinking about the dead, and I was just drawn to this idea of like the actual people on the Maine, because remember the Maine, but of course, it wasn't. Obviously, nothing actually happened to the Maine. It was an accident. They died. The U.S. entered the war. And then you have Cuban historians like Lillian Guerra saying that Cuba was going to win anyways. It's when the tides already turned. And it's haunted me still. I might actually write more about it, that your dead takes on this purpose after you're gone, but to a purpose that wasn't necessarily true and you never signed up for. It's something I think about. I've looked at like the list of the dead, and it's just been on my mind about those people. And yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so my next poem is called Caretaker. This poem is about my grandmother. Yes, he asked you for a sandwich. It was 1992, Hurricane Andrew already flooding your basement and tearing apart your orange trees. The two of you hiding out the Category 5 in a closet. And yes, you did it. It was 2 a.m., but you took your flashlight to the powerless kitchen and made him a roast beef sandwich. You even put on mayonnaise. The refrigerator was dead silence and medium warmth, but you had not the heart to throw away the food for him, despite the rotting the future would bring, the maniac sense you knew would tide out and drench. There is no need to explain. In case he might need nourishment, in case your husband might call out your name, you are beckoned and summoned and loved. Matilde, Matilde, the hurricane says to you from outside the windows, besieged and surrendering from the garden, leaning and whipped in pain, a shedding of fruit and citrus. Estoy aquí, you almost say in turn, the roast beef offering in front of you. You knew his hands were useless without golf clubs, without air, without bread to hold, small task to complete, to order others and to proclaim. You knew this was a trial, bad story, this world that demanded everything from you, another complaint to seed and grow inside your skin, pain and sons and meal preparation and exile. You would greet the hurricane later. You knew. Yeah, this is a true story. That is Hurricane Andrew, 1992, Category 5, catastrophic. And my grandfather tells my grandmother to make him a roast beef sandwich. And the poor woman did it. That has stayed with me. My mother is not like that. My mother would. There would be no roast beef sandwich. Yeah, so I do end up writing this book about my grandmother and that relationship and that subservience. Yeah, part of it is that you knew this was a trial, bad story, the world demanded everything from you. I write that because I hope that she did know. Like, I don't know, what is it better? That you think it's fair, you think that it's not? I still kind of grapple with that. But I guess it kind of tells you all you need to know that he asked for that sandwich and got it. Okay, little turn here for wishing game. I do find myself writing a lot about like Eden, which is not necessarily the most original topic, but I still find myself doing it today with like new poems. So yeah, and when you start thinking thematically about things, you start seeing that theme everywhere. Like, oh, Eden, they had to leave. Like an exile. Like what? And you start making these thematic connections, and it's everywhere. You start seeing islands everywhere too. But anyways, wishing game. There were 2 women in the garden, and between them, ponds opened up wide enough to hide both for a time. They ran and ran far away as long as they could, though paradise was a map for runaway wives, and you'd soon end up back again to the original point. Swimming was the same. They were moody, scrubbed harder and weeping between hiding places, as well as that the man pursued them and sprang them out from under hemlock and water. I have been gifted with choice, he said, the mother of all beings, to replace the dirt that does not talk to me. And he declared pure, one hand pulled out of pond, a leg and a bit of face and length of hair. And so she was chosen and thus birthed us, humanity spilling out like angelic desire. Trees ran and twisted from the earth, fruit sprung like stars. Afterwards, the women sought out the seraphim to join together their grouped wings as shelter, rustle in silence underneath the foaming sun, newly formed scale to glisten under fountain and sweetness of water, hiding their long necks with their loosened hair. Stars grew underneath us, sickness and debt took all men away. Nectar formed in our ponds, and we were not yet bid to leave. More babies grew from the ground. Through the feathers on their backs were more like birds, and they opened their beaks to be fed. The snake held back a little longer. Sin gathered like sweat and crusted like dew at the trees. Every day the jungle grew, soaking us. We drank from the jawbones of water serpents and asked if we were not meant to stay. Ask us if we did not warp and buckle, an oasis below heaven, to spring like cancer and rain the land in bad brew. Let us know if we did not smile, all of us, when you asked if we did not have more spoil to give, if we were not overrun in bounty and flame, seasoned with composite children, why we could not accept the exile offered us, why we had charred the annihilation, our own kings. Okay, now we're going to Mother's Warnings now. This is one of the later poems. This is a poem that I had written that it was a story I'd always been told by, which I just thought was kind of interesting because it came from my grandmother to mother to me. My great aunt would also tell the story to me, and it really haunted them because this is a true story of what happened to like aunts like way in the past in the 1800s. Okay, Mother's Warnings. Back when the land was Spanish plunder, the great aunts of my grandmother encountered the horrid night. They danced and joked a la fiesta, caught up in madness and human celebration, the last ones, those doomed maidens, tender-hearted chismosas, crinoline creatures. But as guests of the house, they would not stay. In our own beds they sat, in our own nightgowns, like wraiths over our pillows to dream out enchantment. We will now sleep miles, we'll never sleep miles from our home. They insisted, as all women in my family often insist. The journey was short. La Bahia de Santiago de Cuba under dark and moon, an engine's low, monstrous call to tired ears, and the gasoline used itself up, and the boat lost its heart. The sisters leapt into the ocean, all silk skirts too heavy, and like shuddering dragonflies, long-haired and dreaming, Las Damas could not swim, beating their arms like dancing sparks, and boat and woman overturned. As a child afraid to leave her house, Abuela Lillian would tell my mother, do not tarry, always leave a guest's home on time, the price is ultimate. Whatever you do, never cross the sea too late. Yeah, again, like the burial where you die, though this is a sad one. I do think about that a lot. My great aunt would just tell me over and over again how heavy their dresses were, and that's why they could not swim and save themselves, all because they wanted to go home. And so, yeah, there's something, obviously that's very tragic. Okay, so now we're getting, this is Las Princesas Bailarinas, the dancing princesses, that's what you call the 12 Dancing Princesses fairy tale. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. I really liked it. And I just kept on teaching it and showing it to students over and over again. I find if you really like something, just teach it over and over again, and something will happen to you artistically, creatively. And so it's the fairy tale where there's 12 sisters, and they go down into this underworld, and they just want to dance. And so the king goes and he kills all the people who cannot figure out what's going on. So he'll recruit somebody, be like, you can marry a daughter if you figure out where they're going to at night, and why are their dancing shoes so worn in the morning. And so all these suitors just kept on dying. And then eventually it was figured out through trickery that they had gone to the underworld just to dance with their little underworld princes. A lot of sympathy for them, they just wanted to dance. Nobody asked those people to try to marry them. So again, Las Princesas Bailarinas. The problem is that we should have stayed at the party forever, that we went home when we shouldn't have, when there was more party to be had. Dancing princesses under trapdoor and grove and glittering tree, feasting on repas, ropa vieja, and deciding that all good things had to remain secret. Beheaded and chopped, our father cried over the scraps of our suitors, king's sons' squabblings for queenship. We had pushed those sons to sleep. Under herb and lust, they missed the party. So how innocent did they expect us to be? Steamed under passion, bewildered onto earth. Spanish-speaking princes who taught us better curse words and spoke of islands to take us deep inside the oceans, escaped from fairy tale. We would rather die than be caught and sent away, yet they married us off and we lived. Spicy greased pits begun to miracle and hot horror, thrusting life outside of us. We became mothers. We would never go back. We would never go back. Married off, oldest to youngest, eldest spinster to weeping girl, and there were no more festejadas, ni un pastelito, not one, and our new husbands knew not of exile. Still screaming about islands, los príncipes perdidos, jodidos, but we forgot Spanish anyhow, and the party was done with, and we never went back. Okay, so the next poem, you know, I was going back and forth on doing this one, but I think I'm going to do it because I feel like reading it. So I'm like, oh, that's reason enough. Okay, and this one is another fairy tale poem this one's on Bluebeard. So the fairy tale teaches you, do not marry a man with a blue beard because he kills his wives. So just in case you ever meet a Bluebeard, you'll know that is the danger in this fairy tale. Okay, so a liking somewhat. At night I took what was given, pricked and plucked, little point bristling, I bounced under storm and I burned. It was something to do. My limbs weighed little, my fingers shrunk like hot flowers. In secret and under cloak, I ate oats like a goat, quickly and nimbly maiming and mewing. He didn't like me eating at mealtime, a husband to carefully wrap fingers over mine and repeat, para por amor de Dios. There was tenderness there. Under ceiling, over bed, pillowed, rocking, I sensed from under his fingers it did not matter what I was. Soft eyes and jellied neck, so I was plump, curdled, caught. I squeezed and melted from the top of my hair. My ankles squirmed. In a moment of affection, dije que nunca podría vivir sin él, and my husband said his beard turned blue the moment he saw the ocean. The bluish butter of his legs, bruised pocks under blue hair, chest ringing under my fingers, a spreading love, gushing eye of squid and nipple under midnight, until I too was lost in blue seed. My husband, mi cariño, cariño, I chanted, young and bored, dreaming. I lived for something dark. My hands never caught the blue, wanting as I did to enter his bones, know the body better, why he burned through the blue and hurt me, and I had nothing else to dream about, one chamber unpardonable to us. Was not the forbidden where we were meant to go? Hate, boredom, affection, it struck me blue and deep, and what I found far from family and home, long-haired women, wives as lonely as I was. A liking somewhat, I told them, a restorative lightly treasured, both of us to live unburied, desperate for nights, sunk in strange inclination. He has never killed me. He might never. The man who does not love me more than predecessors, demi-haired and dirty gowned, not long dead, the rotten brides in the corner, neck paused of breath, breast crust of life. I took what was spared and could not live without it, to choose a husband incorrectly and to burn apart in bad dream. We argued until sunset. Will you not bury me? Was I somewhat special? And my husband wept when he strung me by the ankles, and my hands dived towards the floor. De que me condenes, for enjoying the sparse meals, the pocked body, a friend. I took what had been offered me, esposo azul, and bored wonder. We never chose right. I tried hard to be happy. I gnashed through it all, the blue disappearing. Nights of mistake. Now I can find no better. The one husband, el único, el sagrado. Yeah, I still find myself a lot of times still thinking about the subjects in this poem. And I don't know, I found that if I had married a Bluebeard, I'd be like, oh, he's not gonna kill me, right? You know, I'm special, right? And that's part of the reason I wrote this poem. I think by the end we know that I guess she wasn't judged special. Yeah, but it's just human nature. Well, not me. Something's different about me. Okay, so now we're going to move to a hurricane poem. I write a lot about hurricanes because I think they're very scary. So whenever there's a hurricane coming, I'm like, okay, this is my time to write a hurricane poem because I'm really scared and this is the way I'm gonna let it all out. And so over the years, I'm like, oh no, it's coming here, and then I'll just write another one. So like my hurricane poems just like grow and grow and grow. I don't recommend them. I don't recommend being in one. Okay. All right, so let's start with emergency. Yes, we are puncturable. We are a bad drum. I am a death call trying to escape myself like a bird, yet I have never felt so rooted. I am the bad tree, easily skinned, and my skin could cover the world, and the water is out the door. Our clouds are burdened, the air too big for us. We hide like secrets in our wet homes. We swell as if sick. Nodes bloom to thick pearls, tongue to bulging blue garden, gifted and stuffed with the sea. We meet our roofs like heaven. Please know that amidst our flooded brains and the hands that break off and reach for you, we will think of you with us until the water's end and the wilderness is remade once more. All right, and a couple more, some hurricane poems are coming up. And then this is a true story. This is all after Hurricane Andrew. I didn't know, when Hurricane Andrew hit, I was like 5. I didn't know what a hurricane was. Someone told me it was a storm, and I was like, who cares? Like, I've lived through a storm, that's fine. And then Hurricane Andrew came, and I was like, oh no. I think I disassociated. Yeah. So I felt like they told me what happened in the morning. I was like, did it? I don't remember a thing. But even I think afterwards was like the worst part for me because I actually remembered that part, and I was just very frightened as a 5-year-old in terms of how your home can change and the world around it can completely change and just look different. I also thought that there was a drainage. There was something up with the drainage, and there was like this in the corner in like this street. All this water was pouring out, and I assumed that the water was gonna like cover everything and we're all like drown. And so I know how apparently I would react to if I thought that we were just going to drown. I took it very calmly. I was like a 5-year-old. I was like, okay. Like, I didn't say a word. I was like very noble. And I went on my bed and I was like, it's coming. And my sister was like, don't you want to play? I was like, no. I was like, I'm too busy. So anyway, but that's just me being dramatic. That's not in this poem. This is called Hot Season. I remember my aunt sweeping the fish out of her house with a broom. These hours belong to us now. They are gripped tightly to our hands, however much caged fingers try to be freed. This will batter and worsen. The wind will slap the trees, topple the gardens, burst the fruit, scare the dogs to wildness. Storm making in the ascent of midnight, our walls fall like lace. So, for one more hurricane poem. This is a true story. It's called Andrew. Really simple, Hurricane Andrew. It's all about my mother and I think her strength that she showed when things were getting kind of dicey. As a child, my mother fought against the door. She tried to hold the sofa against the buckling thing, praying the weight to fatten to gold as the door became a wing reaching in and in. A rippling shield changed to a hinge of evil while a few yards away the ceiling rippled, levitated, and fluttered back. And the tree fell, the car crushed under it. The radio apologized, its windows cracking, anchors headed to the bunkers, and no more updates. It was time to run, run, run. So under siege, the door squirmed and my mother rocked against it. My sisters cowered and I bid my body to faint through the storm, waking up to my mother the conqueror. Our candlelit home, dew breached and breathing, and heat, a sister already sickened from dirty water. Our house cramped with family, upright survived. And when asked of the struggle at the gates of our home, I remembered nothing. Guys, it's not a good sign with a hurricane when the anchors are talking about the hurricane. You're like, no, our windows are breaking, we gotta go. That actually did happen. That's not good. But they moved further, like the hurricane center, they moved further west. So hey, something good happened out of it. So I think before they used to be by Coral Gables, which is closer, relatively closer to the coast, I don't know. Okay. Right, so let's move on. I think from hurricanes, I think that's it from that. All right, so this is Antilles Formation. This was a poem that I had revised a lot, that I changed a lot. It's really about like the early formation of just the land in general. And I wrote it and then I put it in like the last part of the book. I was like, oh, it's so deep. You know, this is about the history, and I'm putting it near the end. I'm like, oh man, I'm such a poet. I was very proud of myself. This is called Antilles Formation. Triple bursting volcanoes, defeated spewing pods among the orange squelching fields. Stream drinkable from the summit, beaten, rolled, gasped into by the early moon burning. A record of lava shifted to mutant lake, changed to verdant monsters, of wood as her trees swelled to the heavens, and with them brought rain. Sputtering, breathless, floods burst to green, and reptiles turned giant, spearing into the soil, all to wade in this water. The kingship of floods, the terrible brought low. Splitting rock, defeat of glacier, eroded betweenness of America's north and south. Tectonic blocks thrust with a dream of uplifted arc, out from oceanic dust to form small sea countries upon the early waters. Thick fantasy clotted over cold ocean enigmatic scars, and the blood of the conquerors were defaced themselves onto me. Burned from inception, I could find no water cold enough. Run under, the Spaniards cried upon me and thought of God, and wished to dig in deeper, carve me of gold and sugar, drink me to a mortal frame. Above, they incinerated what once was, and they would call my body home. Yeah, it felt like a poem I had to write. There's like that irony when you're talking about this lost home in exile, but it's also in Cuba. I am mostly Spanish descent, so yeah, I'm aware of the irony of the idea of home, when that home is like built off of genocide as well. It's a legacy still to grapple with. Yeah. And shelter in place. We gelled our hands to the cleanest of castles. Absent of dirt, they protected us as best as they could. Deprived of touch, every single stone fell away, and we walked in loops of home and mealtime, clean little lordlings, chanting against the contagion while the waters rose higher and the rain gathered with the sickness, and we heard the sound of beats walking on our roofs. Short poem. And now, Havana Syndrome. I hope you might know what Havana Syndrome was. When this all happening, I was just like, of course it's called Havana Syndrome. Of course this is happening to Havana. This is all so strange and bizarre, so it just seemed fitting. And the thing is that with the Havana Syndrome that changed U.S. policy with Cuba, it was starting to open up. It really was. And then after Havana Syndrome, it did not, that completely changed the American policy with Cuba and the relationship they were having with Cuba, which was opening up more, then quickly became way more closed off. And I just think of the tragedy of that for Cubans. And I wrote this while I was watching the movie Godzilla a lot, and I was teaching it too, like a film class. I just started thinking about monsters. Havana Syndrome. Your brain becomes an alarm, grasped and wrung and turned over. The sea fills up your stomach, and the rivers drain your heart. They can't remove the ship floors out from under you. Nights are unrewarded with sleep. But you carry on, another strange Cuban dream of American extraction. Sonic attacks offers one. Hysteria, embassies alight with it, says another. Concussions pushed out from Earth, a seething dream, the stars. There could be explanations. Diplomats who one day achieved psychosis, too much Spanish and heat, rare seafood turned paradisical, monstrous and cosmic, creating a supreme stumbling race out of men. Or you have heard of the crocodiles unmooring themselves of the ocean and upending their mouths on the shoreline, the Cuban Godzilla, how they dizzy the stone by the sun-tired bay. Lizardy giants to eat the food and break all soap, polish their skin with dearly brought detergent, gleaming in dollars and foreign bank accounts. These shining marauders, they could never be cleaner or clean enough. Illness brought back, hide thick like rubble, and some myth is responsible, and it is them, a mutation at the water, dreaming of the capital, roaring with each footfall. At night, they take more chunks out of Havana and vomit the bugs of the sewers. Eat at the stone in the quarry and the food line. It is said when they scream, embassies tumble into heaven and then back out of it, for paradise is a kingdom that eats pain, and it can never be made enough. The head is pierced eternally. The creatures are American or communist or foreign, or they never left, or were eradicated early. They brushed by Spanish ships. They swallowed the larva, and the Caribbean sea still glows with infection. If it were to glimmer in Miami, it might open the earth. From the shadows of the ambassadors, even the shadows of the ambassadors are dizzy. They murmur and blur in trying to match the body. Bells split from their hands. There is new sickness here, they say. How easily the ribbons that tie you can come apart. Witness our body unscrolling. Fiery light at the embassy. Sanctions screw themselves into the land. The American opening ending for the crocodiles, for the sleepless, dreaming brains, vertigo and prickling palms, ambassadors infected with a shore from whence the creatures came. In all victories like this one, the island gains so much more, and that is less of everything. Homes slackened and crack, horses travel the unlit roads, termites mate like buzzing thorns in the walls and tree, and somewhere there was a whisper of a legend, a stampede of cows flying and galloping through to stomachs, the marabu rising and grinding to charcoal, hard and hacking and constant, among flowers that grow from absolutely nothing, which the crocodiles eat as well, dark-hearted and tide-cursed, and hurting too, and crying at the bay, writhing to be let in. You are another maimed force expelled from sun and water, and Cuba wins more sanctions, more hunger, more. There can always be more privation, more Cuban loss, more Cuban debt, more Cuban illness, perpetually sickened, plague on the table, on the snout, in the city, in the wormy reptiles, and who could ever want this country to change? This place could never end. And this poem, it's the last poem. It deals with my grandmothers. It's a sad thing to see, like the generation always growing up, and my grandmothers would always say they would never go back to Cuba unless like there was like democracy or like elections. It's sad to see like when they're reaching the end of their life, and that's it. And, it's like it's another thing. There's always a sense of loss, of course, when you have that experience with a grandparent, and then the other experience on top of it of exile, I think just makes it more sad. But this is called Abuelas. Democracy does not flower, as if the communism of my grandfather passes from him to me to the roots underneath Miami. The castles are too high, the yachts too fast on the sea. Though Castro is now dead, Lillian does not return either. Last living grandmother. Inwardly, some heart and memory swells and paces until the Alzheimer's takes her too, until she claims that Fidel is at the door, por una visita, broken mind allowing her to bid us to open the door and simply let the blooded ghost in. Yeah, it was kind of a joke. She has Alzheimer's, and she would be like, Fidel at the door, open the door for Fidel. And like, it was kind of funny. And then I'm like, okay, well, I guess he is coming. Like, well, let's have lunch. But yeah. Yeah. And then, how are we doing for time?
I think one more.
Okay, sure. Okay, one more. I'm gonna end with a happy poem. I don't know if you can tell this, but I don't write a lot of happy poems. It just doesn't come out. And this was like the first poem I wrote at grad school. They were like, oh, write me a poem for a gift. It was a poet. And then I wrote it. And I guess that was it. The happiness, I tried it once, it was nice, and then I just never returned to it. Maybe one day I'll write another happy poem. All right, last one, María Antonia. My bisabuela passed and had to go underneath for the death journey. Wrap herself in Cuban soil forever, but refused, and I mean refused, to be buried with my bisabuelo, long-eared progenitor and ancestor of my long lobes. She hated his cousin. The shivery thoughts of such a soul wandering the Olivea family plot, inferior ghosts, delirious vapor of disliked cuñados, thus long abandoned to what I will never see either, the class of 1923 School of Medicine graveyard, where my María Antonia lies instead, more communist-tainted mystery. And yes, my great-grandmother refused to give birth in so small a zone as Sasa del Medio, and so 9 months flowered with Abuela Matilde, María Antonia, herself a licensed obstetrician, riding to Santiago de Cuba without the company of a husband, to find more elegant air and the birthplace she wanted. Mujeres cubanas are the kind to hate cousins, and love strange graveyards. And is it any wonder I burn badly under orders? For Cuban women, their opinions mean so much. Thank you.
I'm going to ask our reader questions that you have.
No, I explained everything great, so I get it. This is speechless. Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, especially as you were talking about, originally you started writing fiction and then writing poetry.
Yes.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your writing process and how similar, is it different, and inspirations that you find in both other fiction authors and poetry authors.
Yeah. The thing is with me writing fiction, I don't know if I was into that. I still write fiction, like I still do it, but I've never been comfortable with plot, which I think is kind of hard, maybe, for a fiction writer. I always like to describe things. And so I would just go on with these descriptions. And I'd be like, what? They're great descriptions. They'd be like, cut it. I was like, but they're so good. So I feel like then passing on to poetry, I actually did, majority of the classes I took in undergrad were like classes like learning about poetry, like the academic classes. And so moving to poetry and not having to worry so much about the plot, like it felt natural. And I find that doing both, even though I mainly like do poetry, like doing fiction too, there's something about writing poetry if you do fiction that it helps you with the precision of your language. So I think that writing poetry really helps your fiction like so much, and to really on the sentence level, really on the nitty gritty of things can make things like so much better. And then I think I was also inspired to write poetry because after I graduated, I would go to the Miami Book Fair and I would just see like so many amazing poets, like Patricia Smith, for instance. I was still learning about poetry, and so like Marie Howe and Patricia Smith, and I was like crying. I was like, saw Patricia Smith, it was so powerful. I was like crying. I didn't have anything to like wipe my tears away. And then I was just so converted that I just like went more into poetry and poetry. I think there's just something about that shorter form that can just really connect. That I just love. I love it so much. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
One more question, and then our reader will be signing our books for you to purchase.
Yeah.
Izzy?
What was the process of putting together the book for you? Like, did you, yeah.
Yeah, like for me, I like to learn. Like I've always liked to learn. Like when I was in grad school, like I just liked taking those academic classes. So like I'm always looking for something that I find interesting that will spark something that I want to write about. And like so I read a lot of news. Like I read a lot of Cuban news. I also read like books of history just to see if something sparks. Like I didn't read it now. I didn't read it here. But there's like, for instance, like I wrote a poem that deals with Napoleon III. And then like he was hoping to like regain there is a Napoleon III. I had no idea. I don't know if you guys know. Maybe you're smarter than me. I had no clue. There's Napoleon III. He was trying to regain the legacy of Napoleon, and he was trying to ally himself with Mexico, who was trying to have an alliance with the Confederates in the Civil War. And I had no idea this was happening because like why would history books devote time to like this failed these failed allies? So something like that, like a little aside of history. I'm like, oh, I want to write about that. Or if it's Cuban news, like it's just kind of like, I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm upset. Like, when I'm upset about something or I'm angry or like scared of hurricanes, I'll typically want to write about it. And so even like a modern example or a current example is like, I think it was a year or two ago, a general was said they were going to get more eggs in Cuba because they're having issues with eggs and just food in general, that they were going to give ostriches to Cubans, and then like the eggs were bigger and they would have more eggs. And I was like, well, this is just what? And it became a meme on the internet. It was like the Cuban internet became a meme about all these ostriches that they were gonna raise. And so I was like, I have to write about ostriches. Because what is this? There's so much, if you're Cuban, you write about Cuban news, there's so many bizarre things happening. And there's like, it never runs out. Like you always have something more to write about. And so like, it's not in this collection because it's newer, but the ostriches needed to be written, and they were. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.